the inside story on the issues that affect you and your community. This is Local 12 Newsmakers.
Good morning and welcome to Local 12 Newsmakers. I'm Dan Hurley. Ohio House District 31 sprawls across central Hamilton County and takes in Cincinnati neighborhoods, including Madisonville, Oakley, parts of Hyde Park, Clifton Heights, Northside, and beyond the city, St. Bernard, Norwood, Madeira, Silverton, and Amberley. For the past 8 years, the seat has been held by Denise Driehaus, who is running for Hamilton County Commissioner this year. Before Denise, the seat was held by her brother, Steve, for 8 years. So this will be the first time in 16 years that the seat will be held by a non-Driehaus. I am joined this morning by two candidates for House District 31. Brigid Kelly, the Democratic candidate, was born and raised in Norwood, where she served on Norwood City Council. She is an undergraduate degree from Yeager University and a graduate degree from the University of Cincinnati. She currently works as the Public Relations Director of the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, UFCW. Mary Yeager is a Republican candidate. She earned her BS in accounting from the University of Akron and has worked as an accountant. Ms. Yeager lives in Norwood and is the mother of 5. She ran for the same seat 2 years ago in 2014. Welcome to Newsmakers.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having us this morning.
Let's start, Brigid, with you. One of the things that you talk about on your website and publicly is that you want more family-friendly policies by the state of Ohio. Give me 2 that you think are important that you would want to press for if you were elected.
2 things that I think are important are, 1, paid sick and family leave, because I think too many families are faced with an impossible choice of, paying a bill or giving up a day's worth of work. So I think that's something that could be really impactful and transformative. Secondly, I think that we really need to hold charter schools accountable, because they are essentially taking resources from public schools in our community, and I think the more resources that we can put in there, the better for our families.
So when you say hold them accountable in terms of test scores and that sort of thing?
Well, I think that charter schools, if they're getting public money, should be held to exactly the same standard as public schools, and that's not presently the case.
Okay. Mary,
Yes.
What's your view on these sorts of specific policies, on paid leave, on the case of charter schools? What would be your view as a representative from this district?
I agree, and I don't mind actually sharing this. Personal, I'm the mother of 5,
Right.
and we actually live at federal poverty level. But I believe because of my money management skills, my kids don't feel that. But I completely understand living at that level and actually living below that level for quite some time while my husband was working on his PhD. The struggles that families have with trying to manage their money and do with with very little. And so from a very personal standpoint, I can understand and would strive for and support those policies that would help those families, because I live it every day.
So paid leave would be definitely
Yes.
one of those.
Paid leave, sick leave,
Okay,
trying to
so no
manage 5 kids.
No difference in that area. What about charter schools?
Charter schools, I've had very little experience with charter schools. I've also had varying opinions on it. I get surveys from charter schools saying they are overly being held over accountable, and public schools say they're not accountable. So there's a big divide there. I would support, from a financial background, I would definitely support. I think there is a lack, the academic side of it. I believe that there is, but I don't know as much about that side of it.
Mary, in your website, one of the things that you bring up, giving your accounting background, because that is your professional background,
Right.
is that you want to make sure that government fraud is eliminated. I have never met a candidate who was opposed to that, but also reducing the size of state government.
Right.
What would you want to reduce specifically? What would you want to take out?
I would look for ways to reduce regulation for small business, ways, I don't know, regulation, taxes. Taxes is going to be a big thing, actually, I believe. It's coming up, Governor Kasich has slated that for 2017, where they're going to switch between trying to potentially eliminate income tax and then move towards sales tax, which will hurt the poor and middle class when you switch that kind of a tax base.
So you'd be opposed to that?
I would be absolutely opposed to that, because I've worked with taxes, I work with individuals on taxes, and I understand how it's going to hurt them. And I would absolutely oppose that. And again, with my background, I completely understand how the current policies are affecting me, so I know a lot for the poor and middle class, how it's affecting them.
Brigid, what about you? How do you feel about the size of state government, the way that over the past, let's say, 6 years, the Kasich administration has fixed the budget deficit, et cetera, et cetera? What would be your view about the size of state government?
Well, I think what we've seen is a shift in the tax burden from the people who could most afford it to a lot of times the people that can least afford it. So after 6 years, you essentially have people that are pretty wealthy paying less and people that are middle or working class paying more. And I don't think that that is a fair way to construct taxes. I don't think that's the right way to do. You know, we've seen cuts to local government funds, which impacts local communities like Norwood, like St. Bernard, and even cities like Cincinnati. And so, you know, you can say that you're giving everybody a tax cut, but then when your local community comes to you and asks for a levy for your parks or for your police department or anything else, then, you know, it's just a trade-off. You're not actually, you know, saving any money. But I think one thing that's important is to give government agencies the resources that they need to function effectively. And so I would be really interested in looking at ways to do that.
Would you support, I mean, the tendency has been to reduce income taxes. Would you support increases in income taxes?
I think depending on what the resultant programs or where that money would be invested, yes.
Mary, would you, given what you just said about sales tax, would you be open to an income tax increase?
It would depend on the level, but as I see the shift, I'm actually, because with the tax base, if you're going to reduce it somewhere, it's going to go up somewhere else, and unfortunately, the other options for going up generally hurt the poor and middle class. So that's where I would, if anything, keep it where it is, but certainly not decrease income tax.
Okay. One of the issues facing Hamilton County but communities across the state is the heroin and opioid epidemic. So, Brigid, what would you say is the role of state government in this whole process? What would you support state government do that maybe it's not doing now to try to help address this?
Well, I think one thing that is a really important piece of this, which has already been passed actually because of Representative Driehaus, is the Good Samaritan Law, which means that people can look for help for people that are overdosing or something like that without fear of being punished. But I think that we need to look at the whole cycle and really invest money in treatment. And, you know, I think a lot of times drug abuse is also accompanied by, you know, mental health challenges. And so we also need to be investing in that to try to prevent it either before it happens or to offer appropriate treatment as people are struggling to recover.
Mary, what?
I've talked with a couple various people who deal with addicts who've already, and then also Norwood has a program where they're focusing on the younger kids and figuring out how to prevent it in the first place. I believe more resources need to be towards prevention, and one way that I've heard them speak, and I agree with, is to get these young people jobs, and that hopefully would mitigate the need for them to go out looking for money elsewhere, gets them employed, gets them involved, and hopefully away from that. So that would be one emphasis I would.
How do we move people to jobs? What's in your mind? What, again, it's always a question. What can the state government do in relationship to that it maybe is not doing now?
I would work with businesses to see what their needs are, what they're concerned with, what they would deal with, what the problems that they face, and ask them, okay, if I want to increase jobs, how, you know, what challenges do you face, to find out what I can do to help encourage them to have more jobs or to expand in the state. I think really to understand, you need to get, and also maybe outside companies as well, to encourage them to come in here. What set of regulations or circumstances do you need to help create jobs because that obviously small business would be the main job maker for us.
What for in the increasing job opportunities, particularly for sort of young people? What can the state do?
Well, I think one thing that I'm interested in is, you see a lot of companies that get maybe abatements or incentives or things like that to create jobs. Oftentimes those are accompanied by an agreement to say we're going to pay a living wage and we're going to offer benefits. And so I think that we really need to be diligent about enforcing those agreements. In my work experience, we've seen oftentimes companies that might not be paying people a livable wage or offering, benefits or the things that they promised to do. And so I think a good first step would be to hold them accountable for the promises that they made to taxpayers when they received those incentives.
One of the issues that's out there, and we kind of touched on it a bit when we talked about charter schools, but there's a lot of concern, and it's usually more frequently starts with a discussion of the Common Core. And a lot of discussion about what Ohio should be doing in terms of the Common Core. And so what's your view going into this as a potential state legislator about what Ohio's policy should be in relationship to the Common Core? Brigid, let's start with you.
I frankly think that teachers really need to be involved in the development of any sort of educational standard. I mean, I think it's different when you have professionals in that industry creating and influencing policy that's going to be used to educate our kids. So for me, an important first step would be engaging teachers in the process of developing educational standards, testing standards, and things like that.
Mary?
With Common Core, I'm absolutely opposed to it. I've, between talking with parents and educators, parents who saying, I've graduated with a 4.0 in college and I can't figure this out. I cannot help my child. And then also with educators saying that, yeah, there are some pluses to the current program, but it's really going to hurt the kids who really do need a good solid foundation before they hit that critical level of thinking that Common Core pushes. So if the focus is on more critical thinking, they're going to get left behind, and it would do them a disservice and discourage them with education, and then unfortunately I think would encourage them to drop out because they are being left behind. They're not getting the basics they need before the Common Core.
So what would you say, drop out of the Common Core and create some other set of standards just in Ohio? I mean, and Common Core has been developed, on the state level. So what's the alternative? I mean, Common Core, the response, it was a response to feeling that schools weren't doing their jobs. So wanted to increase standards. So to be opposed to the Common Core, what's the alternative?
I would work with, I did last week, or I think it's this week actually, it's been a long week. I went to the State Board Association and I got to hear them talk about their situation, and where they're saying people in Columbus don't know about education, they legislate from there, they don't know what's going on, and I completely agree. So I work with state boards, work with educators, because I'm a finance background, so I do need education on what is the best policy, and because they are people on the front line, the best way to know how to tackle that problem is to work with them.
Okay, so Brigid, did you want to add anything to that? I mean, you sort of started that, but you're fine?
I'm really proud to be endorsed by both teachers unions, actually the Ohio Education Association and the Ohio Federation of Teachers, and we have a lot of good, smart, professional teachers in our state that I think would be really helpful.
I've got 1 minute left, so real quick for both of you. Brigid, the House of Representatives that is just over was, I think, 65 to 34 Republican dominated. If you're elected and you're a Democrat, how are you going to get anything done?
Well, I actually think Representative Driehaus has been a great example of working across the aisle thoughtfully in order to achieve some victories and also to bring some really important conversations to the forefront. So I think while we might be in a deep minority, there's definitely room to get things done.
And Mary, you would be in an overwhelming majority.
Yes.
What do you think, how would you be able to influence the direction?
I think winning in a tough district would actually influence, because I would be expected, working with the majority, to produce something, and instead of because of that situation.
Okay. Thank you both for being here. We'll
Thank you.
take a look on election night and see how this goes. There's still a lot of time, a lot of campaigning out there. To find out more about these two candidates, check out their websites at voteyeager.com and brigidkelly.com. Stay tuned. After the break, a conversation with Kentucky Senator Rand Paul. Welcome back. Last Friday, incumbent Kentucky Senator Rand Paul was in Cincinnati and sat down for an extended 40-minute interview. This coming week, his Democratic challenger, Lexington Mayor Jim Gray, will be in Cincinnati for a Newsmakers interview, which will air next Sunday. With both candidates, I tried to ask questions of interest to Northern Kentucky voters, always asking the candidates to make clear what the role of the federal government should be. I began by asking about the repeated instances of violence between local police and African Americans, most recently with the shootings in Tulsa and Charlotte. The question I posed to Senator Paul was, what role should the federal government play in addressing these issues?
I think before you get to the solution, we got to figure out kind of what the problem is. I sense that there's an unease in our cities, and an unease particularly in areas of poverty where I think people have lost hope and don't feel like, they think, gosh, the odds are stacked against me. And then there is some evidence that our criminal justice system isn't perfectly fair if you're poor, and often if you're African American. I've been a big opponent of the war on drugs, particularly because I think it treats African Americans unfairly. Now, I don't think it's always purposeful, but it does. 4 out of 5 people in prison are black or brown for drugs, and yet if you look at surveys, white kids are doing illegal drugs also. They just happen to be in the suburbs, and the police aren't showing up, in mom's basement or something out there. And so I do think that they have a bone to pick. I think some of the civil asset forfeiture laws have unfairly targeted the poor, some of the city fines. If I get a $100 ticket in the city, I'm mad, but I can pay it. But if you're poor and you get a $100 city, you might not be able to pay your rent. And so I think a lot of that adds up, and there's just a lot of discontent and unease. And then when something happens, it comes to the surface.
Okay, that's an analysis which I think there's a lot to be said for that analysis. But what about the role of the federal government?
I think the first step is obviously local justice. But I do think there is a role for the federal government if there is systemic civil rights abuses or abuses of minority rights.
You raising the point about the role of drugs in criminal justice system and the number of people who are now incarcerated, and they weighted heavily towards African Americans and Hispanics. Now we've got sort of a new version of this. It's the opioid epidemic. And in many places, that's hitting suburban white families. That's hitting center city urban, rural. It's happening everywhere. And it's getting a little bit different kind of attention. What do you think, and I know you have been concerned about this and been doing some work on this, what do you think, again, not just how do you solve this, but what's the role of the federal government in this situation?
And I talked to a lot of people who treat drug addicts, and one of the things they were complaining to us is the government limited how many patients they could see. So we lobbied President Obama, we advocated it for legislation, and we did get the caps raised. We got the caps raised from about 30 to, I think, President Obama finally agreed to 275. Mm-hmm. So we think that's a step in the right direction. Will it fix it? No, but that's a federal approach. I also voted for some grant money for first responders, teach them how to use naloxone.
One of the big issues in our metropolitan region for over a decade has been the Brent Spence Bridge. And
don't I know it? I hear about it all the time.
Well, I couldn't do this and not ask this question. So going forward, again, what is it that the federal government's role ought to be in this?
The problem is this. One, the bridge is old. It's as old as I am, and I have some creaks and groans, and I think the bridge does too. So we should fix it. We're a rich country. Why can't we find enough money to fix our bridges? The problem is we're spending our money overseas on other people's infrastructure. We spent $100 billion on the infrastructure in Afghanistan. No sooner do we build roads and bridges over there than they blow them up, and then we build them again for them. I think we need to turn our attention to home, and I'm all for fixing the Brent Spence Bridge. And where would I find the money? I'd quit spending it overseas. We spent $100 billion in Afghanistan, $15 billion in Pakistan, and routinely every year we give away $30 billion in foreign aid. So I've introduced legislation, and I've actually had a vote on it a couple times, to take money from the foreign aid fund and put it into the highway fund. So I think if we built one Brent Spence Bridge, or even built the one out on the east, let's be an ambitious country again. Look, we built a Hoover Dam in a couple of years. We used to be able to build stuff. What happened to us, you know? So I think we ought to be able to build some bridges. And but it does mean both sides, both tolling side and anti-tolling side, coming together. And if I can be, I want to be a conduit to at least everybody talking. It's not my job to tell people up here what to do, but I think I can be a conduit to both sides to come together and try to figure out how we get it done, because right now nothing's getting done.
Another local issue, the IRS has just announced that it's going to move out, abandon the one-story building that it's been operating out of since the early 1970s. What would you like to see GSA, the federal government, do with that building? That's a 23 acres, for all practical purposes, riverfront property.
Actually, even a year ago, people were talking about that space is very prized, and I think Kentucky hates to lose the employees, obviously, and all of that, and the income that comes from them. But maybe that facility could be, money could be made off of developing it and selling it to somebody. I guess the federal government owns it, or do they lease it? I don't know all the details of how the property's owned.
It was sold to the federal government in the late 1960s for $1.
Well, maybe we should get it back for $1. I'm happy to pay them $1 to get it back, you know? So if they'll sell it for $1, that'd be a boon for maybe Northern Kentucky to develop it into some kind of development.
I'm not totally clear even how to ask this question, but have you endorsed Donald Trump?
Yes.
Okay, I know your feeling about Hillary Clinton. I can read that very easily on the website, on articles, all sorts of things. I'm a little surprised by that, in the sense that you come from a wing of the party that has very clear principles, sort of the libertarian principles that can be expressed. Given Donald Trump unpredictability about principles on any place, as far as I can tell, and also given the way that he treated you and other people who were his opponents in the primary process. Right. I'm just a little, why aren't you supporting Gary Johnson? Why aren't you just standing on your own?
You know, I think I do have a distinct voice in the Republican Party, and I think my voice remains distinct, and I want it to be distinct and to fight for and champion the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and I'll continue to do that. But when I ran for president, I did sign a pledge, and I kind of value my word. I value my word of honor, and I said I would support the nominee. We all kind of make compromises when we support the nominee of our party. We make some relative judgment between our party and the other party. So I do spend a lot of time saying, well, I think Hillary Clinton would be terrible for Kentucky. The war on coal has devastated us. She's also in favor of the war on the family farm, and we don't want any part of that. And Trump has said, frankly, that he would reduce the regulatory burden and taxes. Do I agree with everything else he said? No, there are quite a few things, and I have, expressed my displeasure on a number of occasions. But I don't support a third-party candidate because I'm a creature of the two-party system. I am a Republican, and so I'm going to support the Republican Party. I also think that if 15% of Republicans said, oh, I'm voting Libertarian, the end result isn't that the Libertarian wins, the end result is that Hillary Clinton wins.
Is there something that you wish I had asked you that, because it's really, it reveals something about where you are right now, what you think is essential? If
you want a democracy to succeed, or a system where everyone votes, everyone has to have hope, everyone has to believe in the capacity for self-improvement. They have to believe in the American dream. I think we're at a tipping point where we're getting a large part of the public that doesn't believe in the American dream, and I think it's really important to all of us to provide hope for those who don't have hope, and to let people know that they do have opportunities, that this isn't the breakdown of you've got 3 cars and I need to go take one from you, that the whole pie can increase. We can create more jobs and we can do it for everyone. And I think if I can get that message across, I think that we'll get a lot less of the unease that we have, in our cities and really across the country.
Thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. Next week, an interview with Jim Gray, the mayor of Lexington and the Democratic opponent of Rand Paul. Have a good week.